Chapter 2. The Second Truck. Not far down the wharf from the Salty Dog and the Mermaid's Song, two men toiled in a dark, dismal warehouse. Its enormous doors opened to the harbor and the ships that were preparing for departure. "Are we done, then?" asked Alf, the bigger of the two. He had a nose-wart the size and shape of a small mushroom. "Because I could use some grog." Alf, being a sailor, always could use some grog. "Not yet," said Mac. "Slank said we got one more to get aboard. This one over here." Mac, a thin man, but as strong as any hand on the Neverland, had a tattoo of a snake's head on his neck. The snake's body disappeared into his sour clothes. Mac pointed to the corner of the warehouse, where a filthy canvas was draped over a bulky object. The two men trudged over. Mac grabbed a corner of the canvas and pulled it off, revealing a common-looking trunk made of rough wood, but held shut by thick chains and secured by three padlocks. Alf studied the trunk, frowning. "Ain't this the trunk them soldiers brought in here this morning?" he asked. "It looks like," said Mac, "but it ain't. There was two trunks coming in. The black one got loaded onto the Wasp by them soldiers. Heavy as lead it was. Then Slank pulls me aside and says he wants us, real careful like, to put this one aboard the Neverland. He says, tie the canvas tight around it and walk it up the main gangplank like it belonged to one of the travelers. He says if we do this, there's 2 bob more in our pay." "A piece?" asked Alf. "A piece," said Mac. "All right then," said Alf, who was not one to ask questions when 2 bob was involved. "Let's tie her up then," said Mac. "You lift the end there, and I'll tuck the canvas underneath and slip the rope round." "Why don't you lift the end?" asked Alf. "It's me back, Alf," complained Mac. You know how it troubles me." No more than mine troubles me," said Alf. "But I said it first," said Mac. Alf sighed. The longer they argued, and Alf knew from experience that Mac would argue to the point a good long time, the less chance he'd have at some grog before they'd set sail. "Oh, all right then," said Alf, as he squatted to grab hold of the end of the trunk. Alf was a simple man of simple wants. What he hoped to get from life was food that was soft enough to chew, a place to sleep out of the rain, and some grog now and again. Alf had never known true happiness, and he didn't expect to. And so he was not ready at all, for what happened when his rough, calloused hands touched the trunk. First he felt it, a warmth starting in his hands, but quickly moving up his arms and down his back into his legs, and everywhere the warmth went. It was so wonderful. Like stepping into a bath. In an instant the pain in his bent old spine, the throbbing pain he'd lived with since almost his first day on the docks, was gone. So was the aching weariness of his legs. Gone. But there was more. There was a smell. It was flowers, new grass in the meadow, like right after a spring rain, a fresh orange being peeled, with cinnamon and honey, and bread just baked and pulled from the oven, and another smell even more wonderful than all the others, though Alf couldn't place it. Like nighttime, he thought. Alf could see light now, swirling around his head, colors and sparkles, moving to music, dancing, the sound of bells. Yes, it was bells, tiny ones, by the sound of them, and it was a sweet and joyful sound, though Alf could hear something else in it. Something that seemed to be trying to tell Alf something. He strained to hear it. He wanted to hear it. "Alf!" said Mac, shaking Alf's shoulders harder now, hard enough so that Alf could let go of the trunk. And when he did, the wonderful smells were gone, and so were the lights and the bells, and Alf could feel the weight coming back into his body, his back and his arms and his legs, although along with all the old aches and pains, as he felt himself settling as though he'd been. But that was impossible. Floating above the warehouse floor? Just a bit of an inch, but floating. He brushed off his hands, thinking someone had put rat poison on the outside of the trunk. He'd seen sailors go into a crazy dance from messing with Ralph poison. Alf! Said Mac again. What's wrong with you? Alf looked at Mac, then down at the trunk, then back at Mac. He put his fingers in both his ears, looking silly. When I touched it, said Alf. Didn't you hear them? Hear what? Said Mac. The bells, Alf replied. What bells? Said Mac. There were no bells. Bells, said Alf, and lights, and... He stopped, seeing the way Mac was looking at him. Rat poison, he said, slapping his hands against the pants, trying to get them clean. You already been to the tavern today? Asked Mac, suspiciously. Rat poison? Said Alf, now rubbing his hands on a dirty old towel. Mac was looking at him funny. Gotta get it off me hands. Bells? Mac teased him, shaking his head. He turned back to the trunk. Alf saw that Mac had slipped the canvas more tightly around the trunk, and the rope around the canvas. A tiny bit of the trunk still showing. Mac, it dares you to touch it. What? Said Mac. Me? Just touch the trunk, said Alf. On the wood there. I'm not messing with no rat poison. You remember what happened to Hungry Bob? Mac considered himself a cautious man, and the truth was, he was afraid to touch the trunk now. He knew that something had happened when Alf touched it. Somehow, he felt it. No, Mac had decided that there was something strange about this trunk. Why else would Slank be given special orders and offer 2 bob? Mac was not going to touch it, thank you very much. It's not our job to fool with it, Mac said, pulling the rope tightly. Ooh, pardon me. The canvas now covered the trunk entirely. Slank said put it aboard the Neverland, and that's it. But Mac, said Alf, I'm telling you, God's truth, rat poison or not, it felt good. Let's just finish the job, said Mac, pulling the knot tightly into it, and take our 2 bob to the tavern, get our grog quick like, and forget about this trunk. All right then, said Alf, though he didn't think he would soon forget that feeling he just had. Maybe once the Neverland was underway, he could sneak in and visit this trunk again. Pardon me. Grunting, the 2 men lifted the canvas-wrapped trunk onto a handcart and trundled it out of the warehouse onto the wharf. A minute later, they passed the Wasp, whose crew was preparing to cast off. She's a pretty ship, ain't she? Said Mac. What? Said Alf, who'd been thinking about the trunk. I said the Wasp is a beauty, said Mac. I'd love to sail on her someday. They say she's the only ship afloat that might outrun the Sea Devil. The mention of the pirate ship won Alf's full attention. The Sea Devil was the ship that was most feared. Pardon me. The Sea Devil was the ship of the most feared pirate on the 7 seas, and said that if you caught sight of the Sea Devil, it was time to make your peace with your maker, because you'd be with him within the hour. No ship can outrun the Sea Devil, said Alf. No one ever has, till now. The Wasp was built for just that, and Captain Scott is as able a seaman as ever sailed these waters, unlike the idiot in charge of our bile bucket. Sneering, Mac nodded towards Neverland, now just ahead.